Okay, indexing. So we've walked through the other stages of Googlebot getting to your content. So discovering it and crawling it. And now we're going to be talking about indexing. So you want to check now whether or not the site is indexed and particular pages are indexed. So you want to check to see if there's any indexing issues in general. This is where you're going to want to pull the number of pages you know you have in your site, either from a CMS or a crawl tool. And you want to compare it to the number of pages that are indexed in Google Search Console and in Bing. And you also want to compare it up against the number of pages getting actual traffic from your analytics tool. So it would be your landing pages report. You can also do the site domain, but Google says it's not as reliable. So all of the other steps more reliable than that last step. So you want to see how many pages are indexed in Google. This is from the old Google Search Console. I'll actually give you the new index coverage reports in the lesson plan from the new Google Search Console, which gives you tons of information about why a page has been indexed or not indexed. But if you haven't got access to that yet, and you're still running off the old Google Search Console, then you're going to want to go to Google Index and your index status, and that will at least show you the total number of pages that it's put in the index. And like I said, the site :/HTTPS, not quite as reliable to check indexing. So ultimately, if you're doing an audit for a client, you have to get access to the Google Search Console account and use that data to audit their site. This is what it looks like in Bing. Bing hasn't changed much, but you can actually see whether or not how many pages total have been indexed. And then you want to check to make sure Google's getting your quality pages. So now you have to figure out, I know I have this list of quality pages. Are these pages actually indexed or indexable? So you want to see if the page is getting organic traffic. You can check this in bulk with a crawl tool. You can look for pages within your XML sitemap that have not been found in Google Analytics. So you've given it to Google, you know it's your high quality URL, but it has not gotten traffic from Google. And if you sync your Google Analytics with Deep Crawl or Screaming Frog before you kick off the crawl, you can get access to this data. Also, if you put the URL just in the Google search box and it actually will load in search results, then they've indexed it. And you can also take a look at log file analysis. Let's talk about the things that are going to negatively impact you getting indexed. So one is the URL formats, because it could be possible that you're completely confusing the search engine. And most of the time I see confusion because you've created more than one URL per piece of content. So content duplication. This usually happens because of CMS systems. Most of the time it's not because people are doing this on purpose. And people get confused about duplicate content. So the reason you need to care about it, it's not because it's a penalty. What happens is that if Google finds two URLs that have the same, so different URLs, same content on the page, what'll happen is that Google will randomly decide to show one over the other in Google search results. It might suppress one over the other. It'll give both of them equal equity from backlinks, or not equal, separate equity. So you might have 15 backlinks to this one, 20 backlinks to this one. You combine it, you'd have a huge number of backlinks, but they're two separate URLs, and Google distinctly, URLs are separate if they have separate punctuation, separate formatting. So it does not combine the equity. So you're kind of decreasing how much you could rank for that content. Also, it's going to cause web analytics data collection issues, especially if the duplication is driven by dub versus non-dub. You might be tracking traffic on one but not the other. That's usually a huge problem. Your staging server, if that's indexable by Google, that will create duplicate content. So the reason you should care is that you want to combine link equity. You want to give Google just one page, one URL per piece of content to index and rank. You don't want to confuse them with two, make them pick between one or the other, and you don't want them to waste crawl budget by crawling stuff they've seen before. Okay, so that's the reason you care about duplicate content. It's not because your site's going to get penalized. That's not quite what you're focused on. There are tons of ways that things can cause duplicate content. Every time I audit a site, I see versions of this stuff every single time. So a lot of times I've seen dub and non-dub, which means you've actually cranked out an entire copy of your entire website. And it could be that you have a dub version one without the dub. You also have HTTP. You transitioned to HTTPS, but you didn't put redirects in place. 4 copies, like tons of copies. You could have the same URL, but it's got different parameters on the end, and you haven't blocked Google from crawling parameters, and so that's created duplication. If you have upper and lowercase, I don't see that quite as much, but if you do, those are separate URLs. You could have content on different sites where the content is the same. That's when you start looking a little spammy because you've taken the same stuff and put it on different sites. You could have old school print friendly URLs. So instead of printing and it's like a pop-up, it's printing and it cranks out a new URL with stuff on the end. That's usually duplicate. If you don't have a responsive mobile website and instead you popped up an M dot, then suddenly you have potentially duplication between your desktop and mobile if you haven't set it up correctly. If you've cranked out content, press release content that's been picked up by a bunch of other news publications and you have the same stuff on your own website, Google doesn't know which one it should be ranking. Syndicated content, affiliate content, very similar. Tag and category pages, this always creates duplication. WordPress can be wonderful for SEO, but only if you know how to set it up properly. Instead, what will happen is that your editors or bloggers will create random tags for things, and that will create tag pages, which are basically empty, except for maybe a little snippet of something from your blog post. And so you tagged one piece of content with 5 tags, and so now you have 5 pages that only have a little blurb from your blog post and the tag label on it. They basically look the same. International stuff, when you localize content by language, that could cause issues. And then people could steal your stuff, and that would look like duplicate content too. So there's a ton of things that you would need to check to see whether or not content's been duplicated. Okay, well, you found some, but then how do you fix it? And this is where technical SEO becomes a little bit of an art. This is where you definitely need to be aware of how the website works, talk to the developer, ask some questions about how they run their business, because it really just depends on the situation. If you have 2 different types of two pieces of content, it was totally inadvertent. Most of the time redirecting one to the other. So sort of getting rid of the duplication by saying, Google, don't index this one, I want you to index this one. Sometimes that works. You can also use the canonical tag, very similar, where, but with the canonical, you'll keep 2 pages up. You won't sort of get rid of the first and get to the second. If you have international stuff, if you correctly deploy the hreflang tag, that should take care of language and country variations. You could block crawling of certain stuff. You could either do it via the robot.txt tag or text file, depending on how you want to do it, or you could do the no index, no follow in the header of the page. And then if you have a dub versus non-dub, that's where you should really set your preferred domain in Google Search Console. So to check whether or not you have duplicate content, there's a bunch of different ways. It'll show up when you run a crawl report and you see the same title tag across many pages, or a lot of like deep crawl will show you duplicate body copy. So it'll look at the body copy, and if it's the same across multiple URLs, it'll show you that. Same meta description across multiple URLs generally kind of also highlights an issue. In Google Analytics, you can actually look at the content report by page title and then flip to a secondary dimension that's by page, and that will show you multiple pages with the same page title. If you think somebody's stolen your content, you can take a chunk of the text, put it in quotes, stick it in the Google search, and just see what comes up there. Resolving that issue is slightly different, but that will show you if people have stolen stuff from your website, and Google might be confused about who owns it. You can check Google Search Console and Big Webmaster Tools for duplicate titles and descriptions. And then I always check to literally in the browser with the URL, just try to get the website to load with the dub, take out the dub, put index on the end, put index, .html on the end, all that kind of stuff will also show you duplication. Also, if you search for their website in Google, oftentimes you'll see staging servers, mobile versions, that kind of thing. I've talked about this a little bit. So robot.txt is one of the ways you can block indexing. And it will hide pages from Google search results. It's best if it's a page that hasn't already been indexed. And ideally, the best way if you're on the staging server for blocking something or blocking indexing by Google is to actually use password protection or no index directives. This is the other way you can spot duplication. You can go into Google Search Console and look at the URL parameters report. So this is a report of a website that is using a ton of parameters, and they've let Google figure out how to handle all of the parameters, which is what you don't want to do, because oftentimes these parameters don't create unique content. If the parameter is used to create unique content, go ahead and let Google crawl it, right? But if the parameter is to sort something one way, or because of pagination, or because of something else like that, and does not create unique content, you can actually click, if you're an admin, on the let Googlebot decide part, and you can adjust, and you can say just crawl one version of the URL, like one sample, or crawl a certain number. There's a bunch of options there. Or don't crawl at all. The other thing that URL parameters report will show you, which this one does, is that unfortunately somebody has actually used UTM tracking and published it on their landing pages, which is not what you want to do. I have a whole blog post about it. I will put it in the lesson plan. Or the lesson page. But ultimately, if you use Google Analytics UTM parameters on one of your own landing pages, you are reconfiguring the source of that visitor who came in. So if they came in from organic search, but you have put on that landing page email, they will be reassigned to email, which means you could be trashing your analytics. A little vent of mine. But anyway, you should check out the parameters report. You should provide recommendations in your audit about how to handle the different URL parameters. And as I sort of mentioned, this is how you would check for stolen content. So put it in quotes, put it back into Google. There's also a tool called Copyscape you can use to see if somebody's stolen your stuff. Ultimately, if you follow best practices where you have put a self-referencing rel canonical tag on every page of your site, Google knows it's yours, which is the reason you do it. And it combats a lot of the stolen content bit. It also combats if you've shared the URL with extra parameters, because Google will know that, you know, the one without the parameters is the one you want them to index. And if you do find stolen content, that's when you need to file a DCMA takedown request. I've given you a link, or a Bing request to actually take that out of search, and for Google to know that the other person stole it. Internal search results. Google really wants you to block that from a robot.txt file. Don't let search engine spiders crawl internal search results. God forbid, even if, especially if you have an open search. Because what will happen, and I've seen this in tons of audits, is that the Google bot will hit the search and create a fake word and keep creating fake words and keep creating fake pages again and again and again. And next thing you know, your website that was only 30,000 pages, you've got a crawl report where they have crawled 300,000 pages because they have created these fake things from your search results. Do not do that. There's a creative workaround if for whatever reason, I had this with a client, that you've created a website where the functionality is driven by search. Like they have to kick off search in order to find subpages. There's a way to handle that. But ultimately, if that's not you, just don't let them crawl internal search at all.